So we know that there is so much going on this week as we head into the second semester. Good for us. We won the fight for getting baseline testing. Yes, I mean, it's really sort of extraordinary what we were able to do so quickly last week with the emails, the phone calls. You all did an amazing job, and we're gonna be safer when we start school on Tuesday. Um, and we know the last almost 2 years now has been very, very COVID heavy on this page, COVID and elections. And for a long time now, pretty much ever since this group started, um, we've sort of had an ongoing conversation about charter schools and what are they, why are they, how do they impact our public schools here in Los Angeles? And and for a lot of us, actually, the 2019 strike helped us connect the dots as to how charter schools were impacting our local public schools, our neighborhood public schools. Um, and we really wanted to sit down with, experts on the issue around the issues of charter schools. And so we finally found a couple of folks who we thought would be wonderful to have and come and speak with all of us. And so this truly is sort of a group effort. The group made this happen. In December, there was an article in the Washington Post by a journalist named Valerie Strauss, who wrote about Kevin Wellner, who's joining us this evening, who's a professor at Colorado University at Boulder's School of Education. He teaches teaching policy and law. He also leads the National Education Policy Center, and he just recently co-authored a book. And Kevin, please correct me. Is it Wajma Momandi is your co-author?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, great pronunciation. It is Wajma.
Okay, I win. Thank you. And they wrote a book together called School's Choice: How Charter Schools Control Access and Shape Enrollment. So he's joining us tonight. And then we also have Aide Bravo, who has been an LAUSD teacher for 25 years, and she's at Maywood Elementary, but she's also been helping out the Cudahy community as well in the past little while. And she's here to sort of give us the on-the-ground perspective of the charter scene in Los Angeles. So thank you both so much for carving time out for us and coming tonight to join us here on Parents Supporting Teachers. This is a long time coming, and we think that we waited until we found just the right people. So thank you. And so maybe what we could start off with is hearing from both Kevin and Ide. Can you both talk to us a little bit about what started you down this road of examining charters in the education world and thinking about charters in the education world? And Kevin, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Ide.
Sure. Very briefly, the first charters in California, which California I think was the second state after Minnesota to adopt charters. The first charters in California opened up right as I was starting my doctoral work at UCLA. And some of the professors at UCLA started studying them. There was a sense of excitement among future teachers and people studying education, that charters were something new and with a potential to be very beneficial. That's also something, by the way, when I first started teaching after I got my doctorate, first at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and then here at CU Boulder. A lot of people going into teaching were very excited about the prospect of charters because they were initially framed as something that could be created by people in the communities, by teachers themselves, as a way to sort of break out of bureaucratic limits and do exciting things in their classrooms. There are charter schools that do fit that model. Unfortunately, the movement as a whole has developed into something that is much more about privatization and decisions being made far from the classroom in corporate offices, oftentimes in other states. Let me stop there. I mean, I can go on, but I'd love to talk about what motivated the book itself, but let me wait on that.
I did not know that you were at UCLA when all this was just starting out here in Los Angeles. That's a wonderful connection. You're a local boy. Um, and then Ida, can we hear from you as well?
Yeah.
Like what triggered your activism around charter schools here in Los Angeles?
So one of the things I noticed in the last 10 years is there were a lot of what I call pop-up charter schools. So those are the charter schools that pop into our communities, in particular the Southeast and East LA communities. And they operate for like 5 years, they underperform, and then the district doesn't renew their charter school. That's why I call them pop-up charter schools. And I started noticing this and I thought, what's going on here? And then as a result of that, these students that were in these pop-up charter schools that closed, returned to our schools. And I noticed something very consistent about these students. I received 8 students from a particular charter school that closed. And I noticed that none of them could read. None of them could do math. And they were in 2nd grade. That was very alarming to me. And I thought, oh my God, these charter schools are failing these families. They're promising them the world. They're promising them free iPads. They're promising, one charter school promised every student an IEP. I thought that's not sustainable. That can't be possible. And it never happened. One of the mothers was telling me that, her child was basically her entire family, because all 3 kids went to that particular charter school that shut down. Clemente Charter School, it's part of the Ingenium Charter School Network. They are also operating in the Valley. She says they failed her family miserably because none of her kids could read. None of, one's going on to middle school, couldn't read anything. And when that went on, I thought, no, I need to step up. As a leader, I did become one of the UTLA directors for my area, because I felt very strongly that we have to protect the institution that helped me, help me go, get to college and become a professional. So that's why I became involved.
Can I pick up on something they just said? There is a core element of charter schools that's about deregulation, right? The idea is to remove state rules and union rules from schools that are charters. And not all of them, of course, but many of them. And so the idea is to lift those restrictions. But those restrictions, those rules and bureaucracy, they were put in place for a reason, right? They do good things, and to some extent they restrict other good things, or they do bad things. But something that we've been seeing again and again in charter schools throughout the country is that there are patterns to the harms that come from the lifting of those rules. Right, and so that this actually one of the things that comes up again and again is the fly-by-night charter, right? So schools that they just don't have their act together, or the people involved are essentially defrauding the public coffer, or that there is just bad planning, just things don't go well, and they end up under enrolling, or they end up financially in desperate straits, and they have to close. Another thing that happens because of that lack of regulation is that charters don't comply with rules that they should comply with, right? The most common situation here is probably students with special needs, so the IEP issue. That schools either will steer away or fail to serve students with special needs, or they will just simply not do a good job. Sometimes they will push out students with special needs, particularly if there are disruption or discipline issues that concern the school.
Yeah. And actually, and if I could interrupt, Kevin, so this gets to actually one of the questions that folks were asking, right? The charter schools. And it sounds like what Ida is talking about, what sort of triggered her sort of activism and thinking around what was going on in around her elementary school, was that charter schools like to say that they will take any child, right? That they are public. We're a public school. We'll take anybody, right? But it feels a little bit like this is maybe not such an authentic claim. And what you're saying is, let's dig a little deeper there.
Yeah, let me start, and then I'll turn this over to Ide. charter schools exist in a sort of a netherworld between public and private. There are public elements to them, and they are designated as public schools within state laws. The most obvious public element to them is that they are funded through the public system. But they also are, I mentioned IEPs, they are subject to compliance with, for example, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. They are, as opposed to private schools, which are not. And they are subject to a variety of public laws. But they also are private in a lot of ways. They're run by private individuals. They are employees of charter schools, teachers in particular, have been found to be private employees because they're essentially employed by the company that runs the charter school. And there are a variety of other things that make them look a lot more private than public. So I think it's calling them public or private has rhetorical value, but in truth, they're somewhere between the two. There's truth in that they're public, and there's truth in that they're private. The privatization elements can be really problematic in terms of their role within a democratic system. In terms of stratification, charter schools that sort of see themselves as serving only a slice of the public rather than the entire community. And the models that are sometimes used involve a lot of churn of teachers and of students that impact the larger public school system. Ide, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I want to say from the teacher standpoint, the immediate impact that I've noticed in my school immediately after the influx of charter schools coming in within the last 10 years is the loss of funding from my school. For example, my school lost 10% of its budget. So in that budget has been lost. Even though we did get an influx of students back to our schools, there are other charter schools that are opening up in our area, taking the place of those that are closed down. Whether they're going to be successful or not, we'll see in 5 years. But so that's what we've noticed in our school. In my school, Maywood Elementary School, we can't. When you have a loss of 10% of your budget, you're talking about field trips gone. You're talking about licensees. Like we use software licensees to help our students with reading difficulties. That's gone. It's all gone. And how do you replace those? Those resources? You just don't. Or you have the children, sell items in the community like chocolates and things like that to fund these things, these field trips. But 10% is a lot. That's like $50,000 of our school budget. That's really hard to raise. So that's we've seen that loss. Recently, we have an influx of funds because of COVID, but that will be gone, next year. So, you can't rely on those funds to continue, and that's not sustainable. And that's where it's really, really hurt our schools. The fact that, and on top of that, these schools were not successful. So they took our funding permanently, weren't successful, and we're stuck with underfunded schools. I mean, we were stuck with underfunded schools for many, many years. Now
that's not new.
It's even worse. Yeah.
Can we? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna. Before we jump to into the details, I want to step back for a minute and just share for anybody who's watching and is like, what are you guys talking about? So just a little info about what charter schools actually even are
in Los Angeles. We have
in Los Angeles.
Yeah, we have sort of a special flavor. So Jenna, if you want to hit the present, there you go.
Okay, what am I doing?
That's just hit the present.
Present this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's weird, I can't see anything.
Okay, go to the slideshow and just click that. Thank you. Okay. Yay, you did it. Okay. So here is the thing.
I like the nutshell.
Yes, thank you. So here is the verbiage, the wording that has sort of haunted us ever since the 2019 teacher strike. So when we say the word charters, when we hear Kevin and when we hear Ide using this word charter, in Los Angeles, we have sort of two types of charters. There's affiliated, and affiliated charter are schools that are actually still a part of LAUSD, right? They still have to follow all the district regulations. The teachers are credentialed. The teachers are union members through UTLA. They answer to the board, our elected school board. But the affiliation part is that these schools have applied and gotten permission to have a little bit more flexibility with some stuff on their campuses when it comes, like what, Jenna, like hiring?
The more autonomy. And well, a lot of them also have sort of like themes and parts of their charter that maybe they're a green school or they're a computer school or something, but they're still LAUSD schools versus independent charters, which, as Nicole has said, they're mostly run by corporate charter management organizations. They do not have district teachers, and they actually have CEOs, which to me is funny because it's like they're not even like pretending. They're everyone's like, no, it's a public school. I'm like, literally, it's run as a business. They're not even pretending. They have board members. There's usually minimal parent input. I think about everything we just did with baseline testing and how we were able to do that because as parents, we were able to appeal to the school board, we were able to appeal to the district leadership and really get this accomplished.
Right. And they had to listen to us because we elected them. They are public officials, right. And they had to move because of the pressure we put on them. Will you go to the next slide so that people get sort of
I'm terrified. What if I knew how to do that? You are the one who made me go to presentation mode.
Okay, wait, go back. There you go. One more. Perfect. Okay. There you go. Okay, so we can see sort of the growth of charter schools over time. And funny enough, in the transferring of this PowerPoint from me to Jenna, a little chunk was left off. But from 1993 to 2000, I think, Kevin, this is like when you were starting your doctoral program at UCLA, maybe, right? We had about 40 charters who opened at that time. And it was a mix, right, of both independent, right, these sort of privately run charter schools and affiliated, right? Like the schools that are still a part of LAUSD, but have this cute name that confuses everybody. Okay.
The big distinction back then was between, I think they were called conversion charters and original charters, something like that. But basically a lot of the charters that started up when I was in 93 and the years after were conversion charters, as I recall. So these were schools that already existed that were then converted into charter schools.
Yeah, actually,
I think that's what the majority of affiliated charters are.
Okay.
But also, for example, like El Camino Real High School, when I graduated in 1995, was an LAUSD public school. And then I think 5 years later, it converted into an independent charter, which is another whole layer of confusion and weirdness. Okay, but
LAUSD prides itself on making everything as confusing as humanly possible. They're like, this seems really clear and easy to understand. We're going to mix it up a little bit and make it just super confusing. Nicole, can you explain green and blue and what that means?
That's the green and blue is just easier for you to look at. That's like a cute teacher trick so that you can read a chart.
But some of these are independent charters and some of these are affiliated charters.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Right. So, but now,
it's like a mystery.
Today we have in Los Angeles, we have something like 180 charter schools, right? So, in those first 7 years, 40 popped up, and now, 22 years later, we've got 180 something, maybe even close to 190 at this point. Will you go to the next one?
Forgot how I did it. Okay.
You're good. You got this. Okay. So then what became even more complicated here in Los Angeles and in California was that Proposition 39 was passed. And this was funded by people who are like the Waltons or Reed Hastings, right? And they developed alongside the California Charter School Association this law that basically forces LAUSD schools to give charter schools space on our campuses, right? So any classroom that is considered empty, a room that's for physical therapy, a room that's for music, a room that's for art or for a computer lab, right? All of a sudden the charter school can say, oh, we want to move in here. That's an empty classroom. There is no class, right? Ms. Schwartz's class does not actually learn in that classroom, right? Ms. Schwartz is in room 501. And so this allowed for some of these charter schools in Los Angeles to actually muscle in and move into our campuses. So we get stuff like this. Next slide.
Oh, really fast, what I was going to say is, to me, this is most indicative of something that was probably intended as like a good faith program, right? Like looking at a school that has 15 literally empty classrooms, and they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But what ended up happening was, and we saw this perfect example, Shirley Elementary, I think, or I can't remember which school this was, where they literally dismantled their computer room because they lost it. The charter came in, they took away the computer room, spent a ton of money to put a computer room in. Their computer room was brand new. So there's this weird, like, what's good for me and not for thee, or whatever it is. All right.
So this is just an overall map made by one of our fabulous PST members, Tracy Abbott Cook, because it's interesting because the school district doesn't actually have a map that shows us where the charter schools are located, along with where our public schools are located, along with charter schools that have taken over a part of an LAUSD school, and charter schools that have, or LAUSD schools that converted into independent charters. So the point of this is just to show you all just how saturated an area can be, right? And again, this didn't turn out so great when it converted from PowerPoint to Google Slides, but red dots are charter schools. Yellow is a co-located school, and then the red, right, are these schools that actually were converted from LAUSD public schools into independent charter schools. Okay, thanks for screen sharing. So you all sort of, both of you, Kevin and Ida, both talked a little bit about this, but something that, and I know, Kevin, this is something I remember hearing really early in my teaching career also, right? That charter schools are going to be awesome because they create competition, and the competition is going to make all schools better. So in your perspective, right, studying for like the last 25 years, the charter school movement, is this the case? Has competition made everything better?
So I think there are two points I'll make here. One is to stress that charter schools are statutory creations, and that because they're statutory creations, they look different in every state and they can be changed, right? So rules, this is one of the reasons why CCSA exists, right? It's a lobbying organization to try to keep those rules as favorable as possible to what their current members want. So that's one thing. And I think it's a theme we should probably keep in mind, the importance of understanding that charter schools are statutory creations and can be changed and are changed. But the issue of competition is important because we do respond to competitive pressures, right? We, as individuals, as businesses, as public organizations, all respond to competitive pressures. We don't respond oftentimes in ways that policymakers want us to, right? So think about No Child Left Behind. Huge pressures placed on schools and students and teachers. And the pressure there was supposed to be, okay, well, now we have to really, really work hard at teaching kids because we have to get those test scores up. But the pressure was responded to by looking for shortcuts, right? So teaching to the test, squeezing out things that aren't tested, and particularly important for purposes of understanding charter schools, making sure you're enrolling the right students. right? The best way to have a high scoring student is to enroll a high scoring student, right? And it's a lot easier to get a high scoring student body by enrolling the high scoring students than by taking in a broad swath of students and preparing them to do really well on tests, whether using shortcuts or truly learning. So competitive pressures are very real. They're felt in any school choice system, not just by charter schools, but all the other schools that are competing for students. A lot of what Wajma and I write about in this book are how charter schools respond to those competitive pressures to make sure that they are, one, enrolling students, and two, enrolling the right students, being high scoring students who don't cost a lot to educate. And competitive pressures can be felt outside the charter school sector, depending on the nature of the school choice system, right? So when Ade talked about losing students and losing money that funds those students, that could be devastating for a school, right? You end up having to lay off personnel, having to, in the case of LAUSD, it sounds like having to give over some of your school rooms to perhaps a charter school. There are very real consequences to not enrolling students. But the problem is that those competitive pressures are responded to in ways that aren't necessarily beneficial to the community. So it could be spending money that should be spent on education by diverting it to advertising, marketing. It could be changing your marketing to try to appeal to one slice of your community, so that you are more competitive in the same way that charter schools might respond. Or it could be teaching to the test the same sorts of ways that we project ourselves in the NCLB or now ESSA era as a good school. There are probably, there's no proof of this, but I imagine there are also beneficial competitive pressures that are felt, where a new leader might come in and say, we really have to do a great job for our community because there's school choice here. I think it's important to recognize that could be one of the things that's going on, but to naively think that that's the only thing that's going on and that competitive pressures are only resulting in those sort of beneficial things, I think it's just wrong.
And Ida, like as somebody on the ground, and it sounds like sort of surrounded by these competitors, do you feel like having charters in competition for your students has made your school better, has made your student learning outcomes better? What is the impact of that competition on your daily life?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. We're actually Maywood Elementary. We opened Maywood Elementary 17 years ago. I was working at another school in Maywood and then moved to that one. We became, shortly after 5 years, we became a distinguished school, and then we became a gold ribbon school. So yeah, I know. So when you say competition, we've always been a very competitive school compared to the rest of them. So we haven't seen the impact. Like Kevin said, what I have seen is I've seen charter schools try to get the competitive edge over our students, right, and our families by, lying to family members and saying that they are going to offer them, like I said, the iPads and the IEPs, which never came into fruition, and things like that. I've seen a lot of that. I spoke to one of there was a charter director that came into Southgate. It was Valiente Charter. He's no longer the director there, but when I spoke to him, I said, so-and-so, how do you expect to, maintain an academic level without weeding some students out? Because the way charter schools work is they have to maintain a certain level of performance, and normally it's supposed to be higher than the, you know, than the performance area of our local schools. And he flat out said, you know, that's the reality. I'm going to have to weed out the kids. I'm going to have to select, you know, the top students, because I'm not going to be able to stay open. So that's what competition is creating. It's creating these charter schools that are very desperate in getting, like Kevin says, the right kind of students in their the motivated families and the motivated students and the, you know, the right kind of students. One of my friends, and this will be the last my last comment on this particular question. One of my friends, she enrolled her student. She was attempting to enroll her student at one of the charter schools in our southeast area, and they said they had no room. But if she shared with them his test scores, his standardized test scores, and so she did share him. He was a gifted student, so they, interestingly enough, the next day they had room for that child, for my student's friend. So this is the kind of stuff that goes on, Kevin. And I don't, you know, like Kevin said, and it's not really beneficial. You know what I'm saying, to all our schools. Like I said, we're a distinguished school. We're, you know, gold ribbon now. We have several accolades. I'm not going to brag, but it's hurting us. It's hurting us. That type of competition is hurting our school.
You know, it's not beneficial, and it's also not public, right? To get back to that public-private thing, the idea of saying we're going to weed out students, or we don't have a spot, but oh no, this particular student we do have a spot for, that sounds a lot more like a private institution than a public one.
Yeah, I mean, I taught at Jefferson High School in South LA for the first half of my career. And I remember just about every year at around February, we would get like a stream of students from the surrounding charter schools. And it's halfway through the year, and I'd ask kids, where are you coming from? What's going on? And they were like, oh, I was at, this school and this school. And I was like, okay. And then I realized it was like a month before testing. It was a month before the high stakes testing. And a lot of these kids were being pushed out because the charter schools didn't want their scores added to the aggregate, right? They didn't want those numbers there. Or like I remember a student telling me, oh, my parents couldn't do the volunteer hours. Another saying to me, I was late every day because I had to drop off my younger brother and sister at elementary school. And they didn't want me to be late. And so there were all these sort of ways in which the surrounding charters managed to sort of push kids out. And it was really eye-opening for me.
Nicole, I mentioned the issue of churn earlier, which is, I think, part of it. You're discussing one element of churn, right? So this idea of, in that sort of the hypothetical ideal of public schooling, you're staying in the same home, you're going to the same school all the way through. It's a very stable mechanism, and the same teachers get to know you all the way through. And it's not the truth in a lot of communities, setting aside any issues with charter schools, but that's sort of this one side of the model. The worst performing sector of the charter school community is the virtual or the online sector. They are particularly bad with regard to churn because of, this is my take on it, because of the way they recruit and the way they support or don't support students. So they advertise like crazy. They convince kids to come in, maybe offer those iPads, right? They convince kids to come in using various marketing techniques, but they aren't necessarily the right kids to be in an online. To be successful in an online program, you have to have a lot of supports, either through the school or through the home. Most kids cannot be plopped in front of a school and taught well of a computer and taught well that way.
Which we all learned.
Yes, we've all learned that recently. But ideally, a virtual school that's doing a good job would recruit students who would be successful in that realm. But that's not what happens. They broadly advertise, the for-profit companies that tend to run these schools broadly advertise, bring in the students, get the money. The students sometimes will essentially disappear for a month or more, and then eventually move back to the public school, having fallen behind. it creates a lot of disruption for the students and for the students in the school that the student returns to. It's really a problem. The online sector, it's always struggled. It was in a lot of ways a boon to families over the last couple of years who had nothing else to turn to, but it's not a successful part of the charter school community. The other issue here that I touched on very briefly as part of that rambling was the money issue. I don't know how it works in California, but in some states, the entire PPOR, per pupil operating revenue that would support a student that year goes to the school, to the school that has the student in the fall. So when that student leaves, maybe right before testing, the new school doesn't even get the financial support for those students. And then there's this issue, one more point, something that we touch on in the book, is the issue of backfilling. So in a normal public school, in a district-run public school, if a student comes into the community midway through the year, that student is enrolled in the neighborhood public school. The student can show up and say, I'm here now, educate me. Charter schools get to make that decision about whether or not they want to take students in the middle of the year, or even take students in non-entry grades. So for a high school, they might only take ninth graders. That gives them the ability to create a more stable environment for the students who they keep. But it places the entire burden for more transient students on district-run public schools.
Sorry. So
I was going to say, everyone in the chat is like horrified by all of this. People like, how is this allowed? How is this legal? How is this? What is this? So if we can like sort of touch on that a little bit, because I think it does sound like egregious, right? And Nicole and I have been dealing with a charter that moved into where our local neighborhood school is, and it's completely out of the boundaries of where they initially said they were going to be. And we keep asking, like, how are they allowed to be here? This isn't the community they said they wanted to be in. This isn't the population they were going to be. None of the things that they said, and yet it's still happening.
yeah, I mean, I think that gets to the questions around sort of regulation, right? And how is it that these organizations are permitted to operate in these ways that sound so wrong, right?
So to some extent, it's just lack of enforcement. To some extent, some of what we're describing, or some of what we describe in the book, is a violation of law. And the issue of not serving students with special needs would be an example. There are also just a lot of consequences of deregulation, right? That when you deregulate a sector, you free up people to do really good things, and you also free up people to do very bad things, right? And by the way, we haven't discussed the research on charter school outcomes. Overwhelmingly, what you see in both, when you're looking at value-added scores, which is sort of the coin of the realm to measure outcomes these days. What you see in both charter school sectors, the charter school sector and the district-run public school sector, and I should add like the Catholic school sector, is you see a normal curve, right? At the school level, you see schools that are really doing poorly and schools that are really doing well. And you see that in all these sectors, that the means are very similar in all three sectors I just mentioned. In other words, the averages are almost indistinguishable. And essentially what that means is that given the quality of education, if you accept the measure as valid for your purposes, right? It means the quality of the education. If you randomly pick a charter school and randomly pick a district-run public school is a wash, right? You might get better or worse quality of education in any given school. That's reassuring in some ways, right? But it's certainly not what we are sold with regard to charter schools.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
So,
having two children of my own in the LAUSD system and sort of swimming through sort of like the huge amount of information that comes at parents and families about sort of, oh my God, the anxiety. Oh my God, what am I going to do with my student? Like, can I put them in the local neighborhood school? Is there something better a little bit further out? Like, there is this sort of myth that charter schools are more successful, that they can do more with less, that they have better outcomes. And so what you're saying is that's actually not the case.
no, and the with less part is fascinating also. There's the issue of how charter schools are funded, which again will vary from place to place. Different states have different mechanisms. But if your charter schools enroll fewer students with special needs and fewer students with more expensive special needs. So a sensible public school funding system would fund them at a smaller amount because the most expensive students to educate tend to be those with special needs. And so if you're not enrolling those students, you shouldn't be paid the same amount. There are also really difficult calculations that need to be made about services that are provided for charter schools by the school district within which they are. So everything from transportation to some maybe maintenance to food to, I don't have a list in front of me, but transportation is an easy one. So if the school district is providing transportation for the public schools, then the amount coming from the state to fund the schools should provide the transportation funding to the school district, not to the charter schools, right? Whoever is providing the service. So all those sorts of calculations, who's being served. I can mention the issue of virtual or online schools is really a great example here. Should a virtual school be funded the same way as a brick and mortar school? so the more with less argument is, if it's a superficial calculation, it's just nonsense. There are, I think, really important questions to ask there. Co-location is another really difficult calculation if you're talking about more with less.
Actually, and speaking of co-location and sort of exactly what you were just talking about, Kevin, can we pull up that slide, Jenna, that shows Shirley Elementary School? It's on the deck that I sent you. Don't make those faces.
You want me to go back to that? Do that again?
Just for a second. But just for a
I
second.
don't think we have time for this.
There's a really good slide, and then while we're doing that, and there's his book. We're gonna post a link to Kevin's book.
Click add to cart.
There's the
add to
book.
cart.
It's there. Add to cart.
Wait, Nicole, I lost it. I think I closed it. Can everyone see what's in my screen right now?
Yes.
That's awkward.
You really have to get to that
Nicole,
inbox.
I think
Maybe we
I
could
have to
share the
touch it.
PowerPoint presentation with everybody after.
Oh my God, Rachel.
so much of a better idea.
That is brilliant. We will open that up for everybody to see. Okay. Anyway, I wanted to show folks sort of an illustration of, what Kevin is talking about that's happening in Los Angeles, where Shirley Elementary, this very sweet neighborhood school in the Valley, was co-located by Citizens of the World. And we actually got like the numbers, right? The demographics. How many students are English language learners? How many students are special needs students? How many students are unhoused and foster children? And we compared sort of, they're all on the same campus. They're supposed to be serving the same community. And it really is stark, the differences between the charter school and then the public school. And we'll get that up so that people can see that a little bit later. So I have a couple of sort of interesting questions that I've been thinking a lot about. Is that there seems to also be, a growing awareness that charter schools have actually helped contribute to segregation. And I'd love to hear from you know, the both of you, what are your thoughts on that sort of growing awareness? Is this something you are seeing? Is this something you have experienced? Would love to hear from Ide and from Kevin.
Ide, you want to go first?
Yeah, I know that in 2016, the ACLU came out with a report, right? And the report did state that, and it wasn't a surprise to me because I've seen it firsthand, that the charter schools are the most segregated schools, you know, in modern times. And I've seen it too. In my community, we're predominantly Latino and Hispanic. So most of the schools are, don't have any other groups in our South area. That's what we see. In our Southeast area, that's what we see. But according to this study, that opened my eyes because I thought, wow, what I see is pretty limited scope as far as like, because I went to those schools as a kid. I went to the Maywood schools as a kid, and what was that? And so, you know, it was during that time, it was predominantly Latino. But when I saw the ACLU study the report that came out in 2016, I thought, oh my gosh, like it's a real issue. You know, it's a really big problem. The fact that there's these schools are, you know, very, very segregated, you know, and can you add anything to that, Kevin?
So in a lot of ways, that's what the School's Choice book is about. Not so much about documenting segregation, but about explaining how it happens and why it happens. And I would say segregation and stratification, right? So I talked about students with special needs, students who are emergent bilinguals, students who are wealthy versus poor, students whose parents are more educated versus have more formal education as opposed to those students whose parents have less formal education. And then racial and ethnic stratification. And those results that we see at a school level, and I would say not just charter schools, but school choice in general, they come about because of everything from the location of the school to the marketing that's done, you know, to which communities and which languages. They come about because of issues of discipline push out. They come about because of the services offered. You know, do you offer students offer services for students whose first language isn't English? Do you offer services for students with particular special needs? Or do you offer services for students and market yourself as a school that serves only students who are going to go to elite colleges, right? So there are very extreme examples of how a charter school or a choice school in general can portray itself and create a niche for itself so that it's attracting a different group of students, even when you have the co-location type of situation that's described at Shirley.
I want to jump in quickly because we're getting a question that we get often, right? Like two different ones. One is not all charters are bad, right? And so we get that. They're not all like these big business privatizer, and so that's the first thing. And then with that is the well, what am I supposed to do if my homeschool is bad?
Yeah.
So,
well, one of the things
I think
that we really stress in the book, well, first of all, we include examples of charter schools that are doing things to increase access, right, to push back against a lot of what I'm talking about. But the other thing to stress is that critiquing a policy, so critiquing the charter school policy in the state of California, for example, and saying that it's set up to create inequities, or it's set up in ways that create inequities, is very different than calling out a given parent for a choice made for that parent's child, right? So if your child is not being served well, you're going to look for whether it's a homeschool or a private school or a charter school or a different neighborhood school, you're going to look for a way to serve your child as best you can. I'm not one of those people who says, the parent is always right. I mean, we could look around the United States and find lots of people who you'd say, this is not a parent I would trust with a child, right? But I do think that criticizing a parent who is looking for a way to best serve their child, and again, you think about those normal curves I mentioned of quality in the different sectors, it could very well be that your local school is one that's not one that's going to serve your child very well, and you're going to look for something else. And the choice you make, whether it's a charter school or otherwise, I don't think I'm in a position to criticize that choice. I do think that after you make that choice, you still have an obligation in your community to try to ensure that every child has a high quality educational option available to them, right? So this is the idea of what we refer to as a neoliberal system versus a system that is designed to ensure that every student has a quality education. A neoliberal system is one that basically depends on individuals to find, to seek out and advocate for their child within what's essentially a marketplace. And given parents might find high quality opportunities for their kids, but the sort of stratification that we're talking about is going to exist in that system where a child's opportunities to learn are so dependent upon the ability of that child's parents or guardians to work the system.
And if I could just, something that the next thing as a nice white parent myself, right? Something that, I feel like I hear again and again from other nice white parents is, oh, charters, they're really like uplifting, the underserved, and they're uplifting communities that, need a helping hand. And, we support charters because students of color and low income students, just don't have great options. So I guess what could we maybe say to these, well-intentioned folks about the impact of charters on vulnerable communities? And I'd love to hear from you on that.
I've mentioned it before. The encroachment of charter schools have created such problems in my community, the community in the Southeast, Maywood, Bell, Cudahy, Huntington Park, Southgate. It's created such a problem because of the fact that there's a lot of money being donated to, let me give you an example, KIP Pueblo Unido. They received $45 million to build a brand new school, right, in Cudahy. And yeah, and the leaders of KIP SoCal, Pueblo Unido, went to different institutions, large institutions, and pleaded the very same thing. Oh, they're a benefit to these communities, and that's why they were able to, gain like all this money. They're building on a toxic land site, and they're being exempt from having, they're building on a toxic site because they found a loophole in the law that says basically they get a waiver and they don't have to abide by the rules of, of the other public schools. And so that's not beneficial. But let me get back to how they're using that. They're using that narrative, right? Oh, let's help these poor, but in actuality, they're draining our schools, right? They're draining our schools. The schools in the South area in particular, those families have very little resources. We have low resources as well, but I think that the families in the South area have even less resources. And what are you doing to those families when you're draining the funds from their schools? I mean, I think that's a really important, and that narrative has been very, very helpful to the charter networks in promoting, the growth of their schools, because we know, I don't know if you've seen it, the Eli Broad plan, that's what I call it. That's what they call it on the internet. It's actually called Greater Schools Now. The goal is to grow charter schools at any expense. And KIP Pueblo Unido is doing exactly that. They don't really care if they're building on a toxic site that has arsenic levels at 200 times the allowed permitted levels. They really don't care because that's not their goal. The goal is to grow. And so that's what I would tell parents, like you're really hurting schools like this school. That is actually a distinguished school. We have several distinguished schools in our Southeast areas. It's hurting all of us very badly. It's doing the opposite. I'm a student that came from Maywood, went to all the local schools. I had the opportunity, a child of immigrant parents at one time, undocumented. I had the opportunity because I had the institution that was free to me and my family, right? To me and my siblings. And that institution will no longer be. If the encroachment continues, if the expansion of charter schools grows, neighborhood schools will be a thing of the past, and we can't have that. I won't allow that to happen because my children are benefiting from a public education, and I have to ensure that they have it there for the future, and also my grandkids too. So that's the message I would give parents. It's really not helping at all.
Can I build on that issue? The systemic impact of charter schools, I think, is important. The long-term systemic impact of charter schools, in that and this is true if you think about vouchers as well. That if you have people opting out, if you have a large percentage of people, particularly families with more wealth and more education and power, opting out of the system that the majority of families are served by, you could very easily spiral into a year in, year out pattern where there is a divestment from that larger system, the public school system. So that if wealthier families and larger numbers of families, more powerful families, are opting into a voucher system or a charter school system and don't see themselves as having an important stake in the public school system and see that as a tax drain, essentially, then that feeds on itself. Every year it gets worse. More and more people who have the means opt out of that system and opt into the other system, until you really don't have a functioning public school system. That's the long-term concern about these reforms.
So you actually, the both of you, answered a question I was going to ask. I was going to sort of ask, like, considering that charters, sort of seem to be, in the landscape, right? We're not shuttering charters anytime soon. What is sort of the future look like? And I think that both of you did a nice job of answering that. So then I can ask one last question, which is, it's very interesting to me as a public school teacher and as a public school parent and as a product of Los Angeles public schools, that these organizations are being, supervised or like fall under our school district's management. Like, it's very strange to me that our school district, our public school system has a whole division, the charter school division of LAUSD, that like helps them get space and is sort of, it's like assisting the competitor. And so it's sort of, and somebody else asked it, I think it might've been Chris in the chat, right? So I'm confused as to, isn't it a conflict of interest that public school, and I don't know if this happens, Kevin, and maybe, in other states where the public school is in charge of the charter schools?
Sort of. So I think LAUSD is one of they call themselves a portfolio district, right? Do they use that term?
No, Austin Buettner came in saying, oh, we're going to do portfolios. And then we got him to sort of back away from that.
Okay. All right. So a lot of districts, and Denver is an obvious one, have what's called the portfolio model. And we have something called innovation schools that are similar to your affiliated charter schools. You also see, like in Massachusetts, they're called beacon schools. So you have district run schools, you have affiliated schools. You have independent charter schools, and they're all run within the school district. I guess I'll use Denver as an example because I thought LAUSD had sort of a portfolio approach, but maybe it doesn't. But the idea is the portfolio idea, and you could maybe Ida or you could clarify how this is different in LAUSD. But the portfolio idea is that it's agnostic about what school category a school falls in. What's important is that a educational opportunity or a school is of high quality for a student, and so you want to create this marketplace that is filled with high quality options for kids, right? That's sort of this idea, and the portfolio metaphor is a metaphor about a stock portfolio. So you sell off your poor performing stocks, keep the good ones or buy new ones, and then the whole portfolio improves, right? There are all sorts of problems with that, but in answer to your question, the idea is that if you're neutral or agnostic toward the type of school it is, then it's not the competitor, right? The charter school isn't the competitor, it's part of your portfolio. It's part of what you are trying to build up as a high quality option for your kids. So how is that different? Tell me, why is it not a portfolio model in LAUSD? How is it different?
I can answer that. I can answer that question, Kevin. So when Buettner came in, he had the intention of creating a portfolio type, a structure in our school district. But during the strike, we pushed back on that agenda, and he pretty much quit the idea. The whole portfolio, idea was abandoned. So that's kind of how we. And we did have school of choice, but we kind of pushed back on that agenda too, and so that's kind of suspended for a while. And so now charter schools, what they do is they come in and they try to establish a charter school. They try to get approval by the district. And so the question, I'm going to go back to the question, which was like, how is it that the charter division, right? They have. Currently, the director is partial towards charter schools. He was an employee. He was employed by the California Charter School Association. And so there's a conflict of interest right there, right? And so let me give you a kind of a.
My eye is twitching, Ida. My eye is twitching. We're talking about Jose.
Oh yeah, we are talking about Jose Cole Gutierrez. Yeah, I've had conversations with individuals who know him personally, and yeah, he's partial. They didn't lie. He's partial towards charter schools. So I'm gonna tell the story. I have many stories to tell. So the local charter school, the one that closed, Clemente Charter School, we were very concerned about the school because we were hearing stories about teachers not being credentialed. That was one thing. But prior to AB 1505 and AB 1506, which are now the law, charter school teachers were not required to have credentialing. So, but after AB 1505 and 1506, they have to have credentialing within a 5-year period, right? And so, but anyway, so this was prior to that. So I ran the names of the teachers, and I was shocked to see that the 7 teachers not only didn't have no one had credentials except for like 2, but what was really shocking is they weren't even fingerprinted. 7 of them weren't, which is the majority of the staff, and that was very concerning. So I went to Jose Cole Gutierrez and I said, "This is very alarming. This is dangerous. What is going on here?" The following year, I checked the credentials, and it was very similar. There were still teachers that were not.
Wait, Ida.
Fingerprinted. I went to Jose.
What did he say? What did he say when you said, why
yes.
are people fingerprinted?
Can I have the
we're going to investigate.
He said, "Can I have the list of the teachers?" I said, "I have it right here." And I handed him the list. Those actually, interestingly enough, because there's such a high turnover rate at charter schools, because they're not unionized, the pay is stagnant. They pay them a higher rate to going in, but it kind of stays stagnant, and there's really no room for growth as far as like learning and pay is concerned. And so a lot of those teachers were kind of new teachers and they weren't fingerprinted. So it's just a cycle of, just a lack of oversight. That school has been closed down ever since. So, there was another school that took its place, but they kind of shut down too. So it's a kind of like you said, Kevin, a fly by night. I like that term, fly by night. The oversight, there's lack of oversight. There is no funding for it. That's what I've been told. When I asked the question, why is there a lack of oversight? Why are you not going into that school and checking for credentials and checking that the teachers have fingerprinting? Why are you not ensuring that they have it on the website? Because me as a public school teacher, I can't step foot in a school unless I'm fingerprinted or I've got a credential. I cannot step foot in a school. I will be told to leave, right? And we've had teachers who have been asked to leave because they didn't have the renewal of the credentials, and it was, they forgot to renew it, and it was one of those things. It wasn't like they were being disciplined or anything like that. And so why are and I agree with the oversight we have at our public schools. We ensure that all the teachers are on the website, on the teacher credentialing website, to ensure that that particular individual doesn't have any background of abuse towards children and things like that. I mean, we have to make sure that we're we've got safe schools, right, for our students. And that baffles me beyond words, but I've been told there is no funding.
Wow. Well, I mean, at least in California, sort of, we know that the chronic underfunding of the last 40 years since Prop 13 has undermined all sorts of pieces of the system. So I guess they just, this too is part of the underfunding. Wild stuff, you all, but also like a really thorough and wonderful conversation. Are there any, what last thoughts do you all have? As we head off into, we're heading into a new election cycle. We know, and I don't know, Kevin, if you're aware, but our last election cycle, the California Charter School Association poured millions of dollars into our school board elections. And so, those of us who are sort of thinking ahead are already worried and wondering about that once again. So any last sort of thoughts?
They spent more money on one election, one seat, than the entire city council combined.
Yeah, it was real
right
intense.
Let me say, I had this conversation with Tanya Franklin, and I said, when do we get to the point where we say there's enough choice, right? We've got plenty of great LAUSD magnet schools, right? They outperform all the schools, apparently, even charter schools, and our traditional public schools. We've got STEM schools. My school's a STEM school. We're a computer science magnet too. We've got a lot of choice. When do we come to terms with the fact that we've got all this choice? We have to regulate the growth of charter schools, because if not, we're going to be insolvent. We won't be able to manage any of our schools, right? But when do we get to that point where we say we need to put a cap? We need to stop the growth. We need to start investing in our schools. I would say to parents, it's like, that is your school. That community school, that neighborhood school is your child's school. It's like, you have every right to it. Your child has every right to that education, that free education. Why don't you take hold of it? Be the advocate for your child, like I'm the advocate for my children. You know what I'm saying? And call it your own. Take ownership of it. Like I've taken ownership of the school where I work, right? Because I'm from the community, and I've taken ownership of the school the public school my children go to, that is around the corner. That's the message I'm giving, to parents. It's like, take ownership of what is yours and what you're entitled to. Don't let somebody else manage that. You manage it yourself, because we're the government in a sense, right? And we manage those schools. So that's my last parting words.
Yo, I am feeling that so hard because it's January 6th. Like, it is ours. Those are our schools. Like, yes. Kevin, any sort of last bits of thinking, what the future might look like in a charter-filled world?
Well, I think it's important to maybe stress that theme I mentioned earlier, and something you said, which is charters are here, but charters are also statutory creations. And so charters are, in those statutes, stated to be public schools. And I think that one thing we should be keeping in mind is that the rules that create charters and govern charters and charter authorizers are in a state of flux, right? They're always going to, they're always can be made more public or less public. And then I'll end with stepping back a little bit further and emphasizing something else I said, which is that children, like all of us, learn when they have opportunities to learn. And when those opportunities are richer, children learn more. And when we create more impoverished opportunities, children learn less, just like all of us. And when we have a stratified system where some children are getting richer opportunities than other children, and when we then allocate those slots, right? So where you are in that hierarchy to children based on how well their parents or advocates or parents or guardians are able to advocate for the children, we create a situation where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I think that's also something that's really important to keep in mind. When we move towards school choice systems, that is always a danger because you are creating essentially a marketplace. And it's a stratified marketplace. And children's opportunities to learn are being allocated based on somebody making a decision on their behalf within that marketplace. And some of those decisions are beneficial for children and some of them are not. But a lot of people, the reality is within that marketplace, some children are going to have much better advocates than others. And again, it's a rich get richer, poor get poorer problem. So when we're designing those charter school laws and other policies, keeping that in mind and trying to avoid facilitating greater opportunity gaps, I think just needs to be in the forefront of our thinking.
Oh my gosh, you're talking about democracy too, man.
Yeah,
Like,
there you go.
right? Like sort of, Ida is saying, like, take ownership of your school. And what you're saying is take ownership of the system that is creating these schools.
Yeah.
Whew. I mean, I just want to show you all, like, I'm a note taker, like all my scribbles as we're going through this. I'm going to go through this and like these delicious thoughts that you all shared with us tonight. I can't thank you enough. Like I said, in 2019, when we teachers were out there in the rain for a week, part of the conversation that we started was around charter schools, right? And the impact of charter schools in Los Angeles. And right after the strike ended, I was, all sort of hot about it and ready to like get into it on our Facebook page. And I reached out actually to like academics in the area, and they were like, no, we are not talking about charters. Like it was just like too much for them. And so I deeply appreciate the both of you coming out here tonight and having this, really honest and thoughtful conversation about charter schools. We're going to have Kevin and Wajma's book, a link to it up underneath the Facebook post with this whole video. Ida, I think that we have, didn't KCRW do a recent story about the Cudahy, the KIP, and the toxic dirt that they're building the school on? Maybe I'll do.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll add a link to that as well, so folks can sort of see like the work that you all are doing in Cudahy as well, just so that everybody who's watching this tonight, can see these two people, in action, doing the work that is helping to educate the rest of us as we sort of, you know, go through this system, as we wade through the system of public schools in Los Angeles.
And Nicole, I haven't talked, I think, at all about the Policy Center, but I would encourage you to put a link there. So National Education Policy Center, which is nepc.colorado.edu, has a wealth of resources on charter schools and a lot of the other issues that we've been discussing.
I wrote it. I will
Okay.
add it. There will be a beautiful link. We will get folks to come check you out. I'm going to check you out. Jenna, any last words? I know you've been sort of monitoring the chat and helping people through.
Just been chatting. I do. I kind of want to address something. Somebody was like, why don't you have a charter person on here so we can debate both sides? We are not like there are good people on both sides kind of a group. Like this is a system that fundamentally harms public education. Like I'm not in here talking about like why last January 6th, the insurrectionists may have had like a good plan. Like there's sometimes there's one side that genuinely as a system is problematic. And we are just sharing that information. This is not personal. This is not about parents making choices. Guys, I have best friends of mine that go to independent charters and I love them and it's okay. I get it. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have an understanding of what the system is and what the system does. So when you go into something with your eyes wide open and you're like, I'm doing it, then you're doing it. My kid might go to a private high school. I don't know. It might be the best fit, but I'm going into it with my eyes wide open. And I really just want to make sure this isn't a personal thing, that it doesn't become something personal. We love all of you. We know we have a lot of people in independent charters in our group. We are happy to have you. We welcome you. We're just being informative. And thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
I think actually like the moral of the story for me is, you know, whatever level, as speaking as like a government and history teacher, whatever level of advocacy, whatever level of sort of involvement you can have, whether it's at your school, whether it's in elections, do it. You know, get involved. It doesn't work without all of us putting in some effort. And, you know, we can make our schools even better. We can make LAUSD, as Jenna says, a destination and not the default. And I know that hearing the conversation tonight helps me sort of better contextualize choices, right? That I'm making, that other people are making, that we're making really as a city. So let's take care of our kids. Let's take care of our city. All right. Thank you again, Kevin and Ida. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Rachel. You all are fantastic, wonderful people to spend this evening together on Parents Supporting Teachers. Have a decent new year. I'm not going to jinx us. And we look forward to hearing from both of you a little bit later on down the road.
Thank you. Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, we turned off the live. Hang on one second and stop recording.